Fourth Annual Latino State of the Union. We come together this afternoon to focus on the ways in which American public policy has affected the Latino community, and to think about how we can collectively develop and advocate for policies that facilitate a better quality of life for Latinos in the United States. We thank you all for participating in this critical discussion. It'll take the effort of everyone in this room and everyone watching across America to the webcast and beyond to see real change and positive impact for Latinos. Our first presenter has been involved with MALDEF as a member and now chairman of the board of directors. He's also an author and recently finished writing a book about the intellectual traditions of the Democratic Party. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to MALDEF's chairman of the board, Tom Reston.
Good afternoon and welcome. What is the State of the Union? It's going to be a tough year. It's going to be a tough year here in Washington, D.C., and it's going to be a tough year out across the country in places like Austin, Texas. What is the larger meaning of this state of affairs for the Latino community in the America of 2011? The national conversation has changed, and the change is going to affect us all. It is going to affect our community just as it will probably affect a lot of other communities, for instance, through breathtaking budget cuts. And unfortunately, the new mood is going to affect Latinos specifically and precisely because they are Latinos. We are going to win some of the battles this year, but we are going to go down with some of them as well. What are we to make of this prospect at the beginning of the year? As we progress through this difficult passage, I think we need to remember some old truths and to use them to help construct a new conversation in America. A conversation about ourselves, yes, but also a larger conversation about the meaning of America and where we are going. We tell the story of this community to the nation in many ways. It can be a vivid story of uniqueness, but it can also be a story of shared beliefs, of shared yearnings, of shared ideals and myths. For this community understands what Thomas Jefferson meant when he wrote that all men are created equal. The Latino community instinctively understands Andrew Jackson's economic justice battles to help the outsider gain the national mainstream. Millions of Latinos every day prove their belief in economic opportunity for the self-made man in America. This is the purest political doctrine for the Whigs a century and a half ago and for today's Republican Party. We may lose some of the battles this spring and fall, but let us remember to ask the key question of ourselves and to take confidence in the answer. Which side of history shall we be on? Let us tell the nation our own story in our own way, but let our instinctive Latino stonemasons also take the great building blocks of early American history to teach the nation about our community. Indeed, to teach the nation once more about itself. For this is what the State of the Union truly requires now, a new conversation for a new American democracy. You perhaps did not come this afternoon expecting to be reminded about history or philosophy, but they are the necessary organizing backdrop for the struggles of our own day and for the words you are about to hear from our distinguished colleagues, allies, and friends. MALDEF has been in Washington, D.C. fighting battles like these for over 40 years now. We welcome you to this discussion this afternoon. Our wonderful President and General Counsel, Tom Saenz, our new National Director of Litigation, Nina Perales of Texas, and our own Jim Ferg-Cadima from the MALDEF Washington, D.C. office. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who's a familiar face to many of you in Washington, D.C. Jim Ferg-Cadima has built his public interest career authoring and lobbying for civil rights and civil liberties legislation at the federal, state, and local level. He serves as MALDEF's Washington, D.C. Regional Counsel and focuses his efforts on championing the rights of Latinos in federal policymaking. Functioning as the national public policy arm of MALDEF, the D.C. office monitors federal legislation and administrative actions related to education, employment, immigration, and voting rights, among other issue areas. Please welcome MALDEF's Regional Counsel for Washington, D.C., Jim Ferg-Cadima.
Welcome to those of you here at the museum, and welcome to those of you joining us through the live stream. I'd like to take a moment to set the stage for many of the issues, challenges, and opportunities that lie ahead for the Latino community at the federal level. Of course, many of the topics that will be explored will be delved into in further detail by the panel that follows. I, however, would like to take this opportunity to roadmap what is to come in 2011 for MALDEF in Washington, D.C. Like all of our offices, MALDEF D.C. in 2011 will be focused on education reform, fairness and employment opportunities, immigrant rights, healthcare and other social safety net programs, and last but not least, voting rights. The presenter to follow, Nina Perales, MALDEF's litigation director, will walk everyone through our concentrated efforts on redistricting. I, in turn, hope to outline a few of the major items at the federal level we face. Education. On the education front, MALDEF D.C. looks forward to a bipartisan reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the law formerly known as No Child Left Behind. Equity in educational opportunities has always been a hallmark of ESEA, and we will work to see that the federal focus remains centered on raising standards, engaging parents, closing persistent achievement gaps, and sending tailored supports to all Latino students, particularly those that are low income, English learners, and migrant students. As to immigration, the space to advance comprehensive immigration reform or standalone bills like the DREAM Act have become less clear in 2011. MALDEF and other civil rights groups are seeing a long string of anti-immigrant efforts inside and outside of the Beltway. MALDEF D.C. is working to oppose federal efforts to undercut the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause. From Representative King's legislation to Senators Vitter and Paul and their constitutional amendment to reopen the 14th Amendment, to countless state compacts working their way through state houses that will eventually land here in Washington needing congressional approval. MALDEF will work to defeat these wrong-headed and backward-looking efforts. Last, health. MALDEF will work to expand healthcare access for Latinos. For more than 40 years, community health centers have delivered comprehensive, high-quality, and preventative primary health care to those who can't afford it. The recently enacted Affordable Care Act at the federal level doubles the investment in these centers. MALDEF will work to see that this funding comes to pass and the footprint of these new centers end up in Latino communities and on accessible transportation routes. Again, welcome to today's event. We hope this is just the beginning of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now I'd like to bring up Nina Perales. She's the newly appointed Director of Litigation for MALDEF. As Director of Litigation, Perales is an acclaimed national expert on redistricting and supervises the organization's litigation team and coordinates litigation strategies nationwide. She specializes in voting rights legislation, including redistricting and vote dilution challenges. Perales recently successfully argued in the Arizona anti-immigration law known as SB 1070. She recently secured a Ninth Circuit ruling invalidating a discriminatory Arizona voter registration law, and she's currently defending a test case involving the constitutional guarantee of equality in redistricting. Please give a warm welcome to Nina Perales, MALDEF Director of Litigation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. The 2011 census, as well as the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, has revealed a strong demographic growth among Latinos throughout the United States. Latino growth over the past decade has significantly influenced how congressional seats are apportioned among the states. I have a slide for you. States gaining congressional representation include Texas, with an increase of 4 seats, Florida, with an increase of 2, and 6 states gaining 1 seat each: Arizona, Nevada, Washington State, Utah, Georgia, and South Carolina. Another slide. The 2009 American Community Survey shows substantial growth of the Latino community in many of these same western and southern states since the 2000 census. In Texas, the Latino population grew by 2.4 million. And in Florida, the Latino population grew by 1.3 million. Although California did not grow enough to gain a new congressional seat, the internal demographics shifted significantly. While the state experienced a 3% loss in non-Latino white population, Latinos grew by 25% and represent 88% of the total population growth in the state. In Arizona and Nevada, which each gained 1 congressional seat, Latinos comprised about half of the total population growth over the past decade. Latino population growth accounted for more than 60% of the state's total growth in Northeast states, such as Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Latinos have increased in traditional areas in the Southwest and Northeast, but are also increasing rapidly in areas of new arrival, such as the Southeast and the Midwest. Although the total population numbers in these areas are comparatively smaller, the Latino community is growing at a rapid rate. Looking forward to the upcoming redistricting cycle, we know that gaining a fair opportunity to elect Latino preferred candidates will require vigorous advocacy. Redistricting, at its heart, is about the redistribution of political power. Latinos will compete for opportunities along with others who want influence over drawing the new lines, including political parties and incumbents. It's going to be a challenge to advocate for new Latino opportunity districts in states where the competition is going to be over fewer seats, such as in New York, which is losing 2 congressional seats. Similarly, in states like California that are gaining no seats, we have to persuade the redistricting body that Latino majority districts should still increase. We also face the challenge of advocating for fair opportunity in new structures, such as redistricting commissions. In California, the newly created statewide redistricting commission will carry out both state legislative and congressional redistricting. It is vital that new commissions, as well as traditional legislative redistricting bodies, be aware of the legal and constitutional requirements that guide redistricting and the obligation to create fair plans for racial minorities. In areas where Latinos have recently become a significant portion of the community, the challenges of redistricting may be at the local level, focused on cities, school boards, and county governing boards. All of this requires dynamic advocacy, which we plan to conduct in our 12 focus states across the U.S. In the upcoming redistricting cycle, we expect to gain a minimum of 7 additional Latino majority congressional seats, provided that states comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act in redistricting. At the outset, it's important to note that states always have the option of creating Latino majority districts to encompass communities of interest, whether or not the district is required by the Voting Rights Act. Because of residential patterns, a state may find itself drawing a Latino majority district just by following city or county boundaries or by encompassing neighborhoods that share similar interests or needs. Moving beyond what we would call the permissive creation of Latino majority districts, the Voting Rights Act requires states to create majority Latino districts when these districts are needed to provide Latinos with an equal opportunity to elect their preferred candidates. The law does not guarantee that Latinos are elected to office, but that Latino voters, are not overly weakened in a way that keeps them from electing the candidates that they prefer. When certain conditions exist on the ground, including racially polarized voting, a history of exclusion of minority voters from the political process, and there is the ability to draw a Latino majority district, it can be required by law. It's important to note that the conditions requiring a Latino majority district can evolve over the decade. For example, in a particular jurisdiction, Latinos may have grown to be sufficiently numerous over the past 10 years to comprise the majority of a district. Combined with racially polarized voting and the legacy of discrimination, a Latino majority district may be necessary to avoid vote dilution and a violation of the Voting Rights Act. We also believe that it's very important, outside the legal requirements of the Voting Rights Act, that if a Latino majority district cannot be created, factors such as respecting communities of interest may weigh in favor of drawing a district that encompasses the Latino community in a certain area so that its members can vote together and maybe grow into a Latino majority district over the coming decade. With our strong background in enforcing the Voting Rights Act on behalf of Latinos in the past 4 rounds of redistricting, we will monitor and litigate violations where necessary to ensure fair representation. Finally, we've seen that as the Latino community grows, there are some who try to preserve their waning electoral advantage by limiting or reducing the ability of Latinos to participate. I am happy to share with you a MALDEF victory in one such case yesterday morning. A federal court in Texas rejected an apportionment challenge that sought to force the city of Irving, Texas, to discriminate against Latino voters in drawing the map for city council districts. MALDEF represents Latino voters who live in Irving and who intervened to defend their rights in the litigation. In the lawsuit filed by several Irving residents, they sought a court order mandating that the city apportion its council districts based on citizen voting age population instead of total population. Such a policy would have severely reduced representation of Latinos in Irving by packing them into districts with much higher total population than other districts and overburdening the representatives elected to serve Latino neighborhoods. The court ruled that Irving had the right to apportion its districts based on total population to provide fair representation to all Irving residents. This case represents a defeat for extremists who want to target Latinos for exclusion from the political process by undermining the constitutional guarantee of equal population across districts. Although citizenship rates do play a role under the Federal Voting Rights Act in evaluating whether an electoral district offers Latinos the opportunity to elect their candidate of choice, citizenship cannot and should not be used as the reference point for ensuring equal population and apportionment. Another group of fringe activists in Texas have filed a new lawsuit last Thursday seeking to block all statewide redistricting until, they claim, census data can be adjusted to shift political influence away from Latino communities in South and West Texas. The Tuber case rests on the argument that Latino citizens are improperly advantaged by the inclusion of an unspecified number of undocumented immigrants in Texas, although the case offers no evidence about undocumented immigrants which are not identified in the census. The relief sought in the case is the specific targeting of Latino majority districts on the grounds only that they have a high number of Latino citizens within them. We have met and will continue to meet the challenges of these lawsuits and to focus our advocacy on ensuring that the upcoming redistricting is respectful of Latino voting strength. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nina. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the President and General Counsel of MALDEF, Thomas Saenz. In 2009, Tom Saenz, a nationally recognized civil rights attorney, returned to MALDEF to serve as President and General Counsel. Prior to that return, Mr. Saenz was counsel to Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, where he served on the mayor's 4-person executive team, providing legal and policy advice on major initiatives. During his 4-year tenure with the city of Los Angeles, Mr. Saenz helped to lead the legislative effort to change the governance of the LA Unified School District. the effect of which has been to take the city a step closer to securing quality education for all students in Los Angeles. Previously, Mr. Saenz conducted civil rights litigation at MALDEF for 12 years. During that time, he was a leader in the successful challenge to California's Proposition 187, and he led numerous civil rights cases in the areas of immigrants' rights, education, employment, and voting rights, and achieved several victories against ordinances unlawfully restricting the rights of day laborers. He also served as lead counsel in the 2001 challenge to California's congressional redistricting and initiated the employment discrimination lawsuit resulting in a $50 million settlement with Abercrombie & Fitch. He served as MALDEF's lead counsel in 2 court challenges to Proposition 227, a California English-only education initiative. Saenz was also the lead drafter of the amicus brief on behalf of Latino organizations supporting affirmative action in the landmark Supreme Court case Grutter versus Bollinger. In 2010, he led MALDEF's successful challenges to Arizona's anti-immigration law, SB 1070. Tom Saenz has been recognized on numerous occasions for his work. He was selected as one of Hispanic Business Magazine's top 100 influentials in October 2009. Please now a warm welcome for MALDEF President and General Counsel Thomas Saenz.
Thank you, Ray. Welcome everyone who's here with us today, and especially to those of you who may be watching live or later on. Welcome to this important dialogue about the issues facing the Latino community as we begin 2011. I also want to thank our supporters, both the supporters of this event and those who support MALDEF's broader efforts throughout the year to promote the civil rights of all Latinos living in the United States. I want to begin by reemphasizing the case that Nina Perales, our wonderful new Director of Litigation, cited, the victory of yesterday. I want to emphasize the monstrosity of the claim presented in that case and the magnitude of the victory that was achieved. What we faced in that case was a contention that the Constitution required the city of Irving, Texas, to depart from long-standing tradition throughout this country of equalizing the population of districts, and instead to embark on the bizarre exercise of creating unequal districts solely to match citizenship projections. What the court did yesterday is to recognize the long-standing notion of incipient or inchoate citizenship, specifically the notion that everyone is a potential citizen, whether underage and not yet eligible to vote, whether not registered to vote, or even if not yet a naturalized citizen. Every person living in a district is a potential future citizen. Now, that notion that was recognized by the court yesterday is a critical foundation of our country. It would have to be, for us to continue as the land of opportunity that provides a chance for everyone to contribute to our success, to make their contribution. We would have to acknowledge that every individual resident is a potential future citizen. That's how important that victory was. Of course, that case and the case that was described by Nina more recently filed are just the most recent manifestations of an increasing fear of what is a remarkable demographic growth, but in the full course of history is unremarkable. Just another change in this country's ever changing population. But this fear of an unremarkable yet remarkable demographic growth has been exploited by too many for short-term political gain. You've seen them, we've heard them. The last campaign was monopolized by them and their attempts to take fears of demographic change, and in particular, fear of the Latino population's growth, and translate it into electoral gain. A mission dubious mission that succeeded in too many parts of this country. Their attempts to exploit that fear undermine a basic constitutional principle of inclusion and incorporation that have withstood the test of time and indeed been tested throughout our history as we have become truer to the words of our Constitution. Of course, as our board chair has indicated, we had a victory in the case that Nina described, but we have also faced and will face certain defeats. One that cannot go without further remark is the failure of a small-minded minority in the United States Senate to support a vote and the enactment of the DREAM Act, a bill that recognizes our principled tradition of opportunity for each generation, freed of prejudice or constraint based on any parental deed or background. An act that would have been true to our principled view that every person can and should be allowed to contribute to our progress. Of course, that defeat is a momentary defeat. We know that the DREAM Act will reemerge, whether this year or next, or a year after. The DREAM Act will reemerge and will be victorious, because the principle that underlies it is simply too powerful. Of course, I have described the defeat of the DREAM Act, the claims in Texas against Irving and against the census are just a manifestation of what I've described. The increasing tendency to challenge the Latino population, to challenge its inclusion, to challenge basic constitutional values of this nation. And yet those who do this betray their deep lack of faith in our constitutional principles' durability and universality. Their faithlessness in our constitutional principles is betrayed by the lawsuits that they file, by the legislation that they block, by the initiatives that they champion. Of course, the irony is that so many of them clothe themselves in colonial garb, proclaim their faithfulness in the Constitution, and yes, even recite it ceremoniously on the House floor. Now, it is true that, like my board chair, Tom Reston, nature may soon give me the appearance of a powdered wig without the powder or the wig. But I personally have no desire to dress like a colonial founder to demonstrate my belief in our Constitution. And I know that the Latino community, writ large, also has no interest in putting on colonial garb to demonstrate a commitment to our Constitution. That is because we recognize that the colonial founders did not alone give us our Constitution. They were joined in giving us, this generation, our Constitution and its principles by those who over many generations fought and died to support those principles. So many of them Latino heroes, recognized and unrecognized. Our Constitution was given to us by those who struggled and marched and sacrificed to make our nation truer to the meaning of the words as they were written. Our Constitution was given to us by those who endured great hardship and overcame tremendous physical and economic barriers to arrive in this country, to raise their families, to contribute to our greatness. We in the Latino community recognize this broader notion of constitutional authorship. We recognize that so many gave us the Constitution that we must now defend. Unlike our opponents, we know that the Constitution is not a menu but a mandate, a coherent and comprehensive mandate. You don't get to pick and choose when it comes to the Constitution. Promoting a new and heretofore unheard of view of the Second Amendment while simultaneously cutting back on the First Amendment rights of those most vulnerable. Celebrating our nationhood and our greatness as a nation while undermining our unity by enacting immigration regulations at the state and local level. Taking an oath to uphold the Constitution while all along intending to undermine the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment that is so critical to our progress to date and for the future. The constitutional mandate is more powerful. The constitutional mandate that we must defend is a part of our history, our tradition, and it belongs to all of us. Just as authorship extends beyond those in colonial garb to those who sacrificed in the way I've described, the stewardship extends to all of us, from the most recent immigrant in whatever status to those who are Mayflower babies. We know in the Latino community that defending that constitutional mandate goes beyond defeating the most blatant violations of our protections, goes beyond challenging the SB 1070s. It extends to ensuring that we enact legislation that is consistent with our constitutional principles. For example, it means enacting education legislation whose first principle is to secure equal educational opportunity, whose first principle is not about a slogan, but about ensuring accountability for seeking and securing that equal opportunity. Constitutional mandate is about recognizing that there is no threat to anyone from information or encouragement from the highest levels toward healthful living and the avoidance of obesity among our children. It recognizes that there is no threat from acting boldly to ensure health care availability for everyone. The constitutional mandate extends to abiding by constitutional principles even when, technically, the Constitution does not require the Congress to do so. It means enacting immigration reform that embodies our constitutional values and eliminating the long-standing system that discriminates against immigrants from Mexico simply because they are from Mexico. The constitutional mandate extends to allowing the president to perform his constitutionally assigned duty of appointing federal judges. It means ensuring that the Senate seats those judges, seats judges with a diversity of backgrounds and experiences, including those who have toiled in the field of public interest. The constitutional mandate extends toward acknowledging as a nation that having a living constitution means full marriage equality, regardless of what those in constitutional garb, colonial garb, might have believed. It does also extend toward continuing to fight against those state legislators and local council members who would seek to target the Latino community by restricting rights to housing, education, free speech, even the right to live in peace in this nation through policies of attrition, through enforcement, through policies of exclusion. 2011 is a momentous year, but not because of the Tea Party, not because of the defeats of progressive legislation like the DREAM Act, not because of the attempts to repeal progressive legislation like health care reform. 2011 is momentous because it is a critical Latino constitutional moment. As the community most targeted by these assaults on our constitutional values and principles, we have an obligation. We have an obligation to defend the values that are so universally held by the most recent immigrant or those who can trace their history in this country to family members who could factually state that they did not cross the border, but the border crossed them. By our participation, vigorous and consistent, in electoral and political movements, we can demonstrate our answer to this constitutional moment. We can demonstrate our belief, our faithfulness, in contrast to their faithlessness, in the constitutional principles and values that built this country, that attracted us or our ancestors, no matter how long ago that was, to be a part of this national experiment. In 2011, in this Latino constitutional moment, we can and must work together to demonstrate and secure the full promise of our Constitution, of our principle of fairness, opportunity, and justice for all. Thank you.
Please thank Tom once again and all our speakers. Before I introduce our terrific panel, I want to take a moment of moderator's privilege and explain my presence here. I'm not a member of MALDEF. I am not a member of any of your organizations, in fact. I don't advocate for them, I don't give money to them, and I don't publicly endorse their aims or agendas. I'm a reporter, and I was invited here in part because I know how to read a teleprompter, I know which camera to look at, and I know how to ask questions. So if you have any questions about my presence here, that should answer most of them. I am not speaking this afternoon on behalf of the PBS NewsHour, Public Broadcasting, National Public Radio, HITN, or any other entity. I'm here to ask good questions and hopefully get good points out on the table. And I was glad when invited by MALDEF to do that. I've covered the issues that have been the subject and the feedstock of the last three speeches for most of my adult life. So I guess I earned my way into the room. But whether anything that you want to happen or whether anything you are trying to do succeeds, that's really up to you and not up to me. So we clear on that part? Okay, good. We're so pleased to have with us this afternoon Russell Roybal, Deputy Executive Director of External Relations at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. The mission of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force is to build the political power of the LGBT community from the ground up. As part of a broader social justice movement, the organization works to create a nation that respects the diversity of human expression and identity and creates opportunity for all. We also have Lisa Pino, Deputy Administrator of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, at the Food and Nutrition Service of the United States Department of Agriculture. It's a way of checking whether any of you were listening. SNAP is a federal assistance program that provides financial assistance and nutrition information to low and no-income people and families living in the U.S. Of course, we have MALDEF's own President and General Counsel, Tom Saenz. Next, we have Maria Teresa Kumar, Executive Director of Voto Latino. Founded in 2004, Voto Latino is shaking up America's political establishment by bringing thousands of young Latinos into the political process. Voto Latino has produced award-winning multiple media campaigns headlined by celebrity voices that encourage young Latinos to register to vote and get engaged. Voto Latino strongly believes it's this new generation of young American Latinos who will shape America's democracy for the coming generation. And last but certainly not least, Brent Wilkes, National Executive Director of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. Through community-based programs operating at more than 880 LULAC councils nationwide, LULAC advances the economic condition, educational attainment, political influence, health, and civil rights of Hispanic Americans. The organization involves and serves all Hispanic nationality groups. Now, Tom, you pled your brief just a moment ago. I'd like to hear from the other panelists from where you sit and from the work that you're involved in now. What is the Latino State of the Union? The president gets 75 minutes. You only get a couple. But give me a thumbnail sketch. Russell, let's start with you.
Well, I think from the perspective I sit and the organization that I represent, it's a critical time for Latinos in terms of the state of our union here in the United States. As Tom said, Latinos are being targeted and by people who are trying to hold on to the power that they have, given that they see what the future is coming and the information that was presented earlier. So I think it's a critical time. 2011 is a critical year, and I think we're going to see even more vitriol come toward Latinos over the next year. It's going to be a very ugly election in 2012. And so I think this is the year that we need to work together, as Tom said, and to really coalesce around multiple issues, which we're going to talk about today.
Lisa?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about hunger and obesity and the paradox of how those two dynamics coexist. I mean, if we're not healthy as a community, what can we do without our health? So right now, obesity is at a crisis proportion. The obesity rate has tripled in the last 30 years. 1 out of every 3 children in the country is either overweight or obese, and those statistics are far worse for the Latino community. 40% of our children are either overweight or obese. And when you think about how Latinos suffer from higher obesity rates, higher food insecurity rates. That's a term that the USDA uses to measure access and availability to food, and look at, the higher incidence of diabetes and heart disease and all the other ailments that accompany that. This is the time to make obesity and health not just of the Latino community, but especially of our children, because that's essential to the health and well-being of this country and its future.
Maria Teresa.
First of all, thank you so much, MALDEF, for putting this together. Tom, thank you. I think that this is an incredible time right now for the American Latino community, specifically because of the issues. We are at the bottom of the rung when it comes to education, when it comes, unfortunately, to health disparities, when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to foreclosures. But at the same time, as Pew Hispanic Center pointed out, we're also the most optimistic across lines of all Americans. So there's an opportunity there, and we can't lose that opportunity to fight for that hope, number one. But I think also what we're missing right now is a missed opportunity that we have to stop saying that these are Latino issues. Because fundamentally, on the grand scheme of things, because of our population size, because of our youth, because of where our next generation workforce is coming, it's an American issue. So even though we keep giving a lot of, giving a lot of attention to the Tea Party is less than 18% within the Republican Party. So how do we start creating conversations about the State of the Union for Latinos that start involving progressive whites, African Americans, and Asians? Because if we don't, then we are going to be at the bottom of the rung. And we have to make sure that we are continuing to open this conversation. That's why I applaud MALDEF for opening this conversation beyond this room by live streaming it to other organizations across the country, because these issues are incredibly important to us, but they're important to America, and we can't lose sight of that. So thank you.
And Brent?
Well, I think the State of the Union really is a tale of two communities. You've got, on the one hand, I think some of the most repressive anti-immigrant, anti-Latino voices out now, even in the mainstream media and in Congress and throughout the country, spewing probably some of the most negative intolerant speech that I've heard in decades. And that's a serious concern and something that we've got to confront and address. It's affecting not only the issue of immigration, but every issue, because they're applying the same strategies towards education, access to health care, access to every issue that we care about, even housing. And yet at the same time, when you go out into the communities, you see the tremendous types of things that Maria Teresa is talking about, these young folks who are really excited about going to college and excited about their careers, this optimism in the community. And you also start to see the polling and the fact that the Latino voting strength keeps increasing. Many folks, including folks at LULAC, believe that it would be impossible for someone to get elected president of the United States now without getting a substantial portion of the Latino vote. That's tremendous power. And in some sense, it's a very strong State of the Union in the sense that the future looks bright. The community has a lot of strength and a lot of things going for it. What I think is happening is that because of that strength, that perhaps moving other groups out of the limelight and the ascendancy of the Latino community, that's creating this tension that we feel such blowback from. So it's getting darker right before the light, I guess, and I'm hoping that we can push through this difficult time period together, work hand in hand with the organizations in this room, and make sure that we defend our community's interests and at the same time prepare for the day in which Latinos are not just trying to preserve our rights as a minority community, but is looking at taking a leadership role in this country and really becoming the driving force for the American economy and the American leadership throughout the world.
Tom, you just heard Brent talk about ascendancy creating some of these tensions. And certainly anyone who's looked in the past couple of weeks at the brand spanking new census data might conclude, look, if you want a functioning housing market, no matter where you are, you're going to need Latino buyers who can buy. If you want to get a Social Security check in 2030, you're going to need Latino workers who earn. If you want a functioning country in 2040 and beyond, you can't do it without the people represented by the people in this room. So maybe this is just a moment in time, this backlash, this pushback, the legal machinations that you described the struggle against. Time is going to take care of some of this. No?
There's no question that we're in a transition period. This is another of a series of historical demographic transitions that this country has faced. We faced them successfully in the past and will face this one successfully. The question is how difficult that transition period is and what damage is left once we get through it. There are folks who in this transition period would like to saddle us with changes in our basic principles, would like to change how we view who is a citizen, would like to change how we view who has a right to political participation. Those would be damaging and long-term harms that would be dealt in a transition period that we will get through. So you are right, but we still have a responsibility, particularly in the Latino community, in coalition with the other communities as was mentioned, but to ensure that this transition period does not leave the nation permanently damaged and does not occur with so much vitriol and intergroup conflict as to undermine the serious foundations of this nation.
If you go back, maybe start the clock running in the mid-'60s with the Hart-Celler Act, there's been periodic mumblings about changing the rules of the game, revisiting how and under what circumstances people become citizens of the United States. But has the ante been upped in a way that is even surprising to you on this panel, when people no longer complain about the 14th Amendment as some abstract proposition, but actually start to lay the groundwork for debating a repeal? Brent?
Absolutely, it's frightening, and it's amazing to me how you could go back and try to address something that's tied up to the very beginnings of the civil rights movement. The 14th Amendment, for God's sakes, was put in place to stop, in essence, southern states from discriminating against African Americans and denying citizenship to African Americans. right out of the period of slavery in this country. And I would have thought that that's something that we would not go back and try to revisit, because I think every American can understand how awful that period was. But here we are talking about the possibility of repealing the 14th Amendment and, in essence, creating two types of Americans, one without rights that would be hereditary from generation to generation. Potentially people could be in an undocumented status. Probably the workers of this nation would end up being without citizenship, and those that benefit from their labor would have it. And I think that is just awful, and I certainly hope that the vast majority of Americans pull back from such a nasty approach. I think that there's even some folks in the Republican Party which have signaled they're opposed to this, but I'm surprised at how many haven't signaled their opposition, and I think that we've got to push back hard on this, because that really is, I think, Ray, you even said one time that the goal sometimes of this immigration discussion may not be just controlling immigration, but maybe trying to put one community under the thumb of the majority population so we can exploit them and benefit from their work, but then deny them rights. And I think if this 14th Amendment stuff keeps getting pushed, that's a clear sign that that's what they're trying to do. It's not about immigration anymore. It's about trying to create a hardworking community that you exploit and hold as like an indentured servant. So it's very troubling, and I'm certainly hoping that we can reject that, because I think one thing about this country, we believe in hard work, and we believe that people who do work hard should be given the full rights of American citizenship.
So, Maria, what's all this about? Making the previously unthinkable suddenly thinkable.
Well,
what's going on?
Personally, I think it's, in one sense, I think it's political expediency. But to build a little bit about what Brent was saying is to create a permanent underclass of stateless, nationless individuals is against our national security interest, period. All we have to look at is actually look at history and what happened in Germany when they tried to do the exact same thing with the Turks. When they brought in Turkish labor and they were supposed to send the Turks back, didn't happen. And so these kids all of a sudden were growing up without being able to identify themselves either as German or as Turkish, living in Germany, until most recently until they were 18 years old. That created anger. About 2 years ago in France, if you remember, Paris all of a sudden was inundated and circled by riots, by a lot of unhappy young people who were Muslim, that couldn't declare their citizenship for France. And Paris burned. This was only 2 years ago. So when people start talking seriously about taking and repealing the 14th Amendment of citizenship, it's not just one that we're going against what we believe as our fundamental identity as Americans. Because Americans, we are immigrants, fundamentally. That's who our identity is. But secondly, we're striking at the very heart of our national security. Because we're trying to basically tell people that they are not American when they feel it. And where else are they going to go? So when folks start talking about repealing the 14th Amendment, this is serious. Because it's not just about who we feel as Americans, but also it's against our best interests for our national security. So I think it's something that we have to constantly be fighting against. The unfortunate thing is that Republicans and Democrats whisper saying, oh, this will never pass. But what are we creating at the local level when there is such friction? Our Voto Latino has been spending a lot of time in Arizona, and I can tell you it's getting messy because families are starting to divide themselves and identifying themselves of, well, I was born here, but brother, you were born back in Mexico, so you're not American. Imagine those table conversations that they're having. We're dividing families. And I think this is a time when, as Latinos, we have to not only protest, I think that's important, but we have to have these conversations outside and, again, break the silo. This is a Latino issue. We're talking fundamentally of what is an American. And Americans were fundamentally immigrants, and this is where our future does lie.
Russell, does this represent to you a significant escalation of the undercurrent of immigration debate, rediscussing birthright citizenship?
Of course. It's a complete escalation and targeting of a particular community. And, let's make no mistake that the folks who are behind things like SB 1070 are also the ones that are behind English-only laws and restricting the rights of same-sex couples and wanting to roll back job protections for Latinos and for LGBT people. So it's if it goes anywhere, it's going to be scary here in the U.S. because which community is going to be targeted next as a part of this escalation and this growing resentment toward particular communities who are different from what people feel is like the mainstream.
SB 1070 has come up a couple of times in this conversation. When I was down in Arizona to cover its implementation and the accompanying legal cases, people in government, including the co-sponsors, said that Latinos had nothing to fear from this law because it was only meant to seek those who, by their presence in the state, were breaking the law, and didn't involve searching for them as much as when they were come upon in the course of other business, they would be assessed for their status in the country. Law enforcement, I went out on patrol in squad cars, and it was 115 degrees outside, but nice and comfortable inside. Law enforcement said it doesn't really change what we're already doing. Why was this so significant, Tom? Why is SB 1070 and the lookalike legislation in at least a dozen other states so important to your organization?
Because the legislation itself does change things. It changes things dramatically. Those law enforcement agents who were convinced they would be doing nothing differently, I have questions about what they were doing in the past. But I also have questions about how well they understand the law. Of course, that problem is exacerbated when you have the co-authors trying to reinterpret what they themselves wrote. I think they amended it for the first time less than a week after it was signed. But they needed to go through many more amendments to get it anywhere near what they purported it to be about. But if you read it, what it would have required is every police officer to determine if he or she had a reasonable suspicion about any person they came into contact with, in any context, any person they came into contact with. And if they had a reasonable suspicion that that person was undocumented, they would have to provoke action on their own, on their agency's part, perhaps on ICE's part. But the worst of it is that those who wrote the law empowered those who are from the most extreme position on this issue to then sue any police officer or agency that they didn't think was being aggressive enough about going out and questioning folks. So it was a sea change if it were ever to be implemented. But truthfully, the authors weren't really interested in implementation. They were interested in a political issue. They were interested in being reelected or being elected to their next position. And they will reap what they've sown. When Arizona changes, those folks will suffer in their access to do the kinds of things that they're doing today. The danger is that it's now spread across the country, and there are too many out there who, ignorant of the Constitution or willfully ignorant of the Constitution, are seeking to expand beyond 1070 or to reenact it. I'm concerned about the 14th Amendment, but I'm even more concerned about those who now want to reinterpret the long-standing practice and philosophy of the Citizenship Clause without going through the amendment process. I don't think the amendment process will go anywhere. It's too difficult, and I think people faced with a decision will understand how important the 14th Amendment following our Civil War is to this country and what it is and can become. But when folks go out and argue that they can reinterpret long-standing, plain language interpretations of the Citizenship Clause, that's a dangerous notion. Their theory is incoherent. Their theory, if it was extended retroactively, would call into question the citizenship of those who are Mayflower babies and can trace their entry to this country back to pre-colonial and colonial periods. Their theory is incoherent, but they want to apply it selectively today to a certain group of people. And that's a dangerous notion when it comes to a constitution.
We're transitioning to redistricting at this point in the conversation, and Lisa, I haven't excluded you. It's just that as the representative of the federal government on the panel, I don't want to push you in places where you weren't prepared to go when you came here. But when you are an administrator, does it make a difference to have offices calling, members calling, saying, oh, I think you overlooked my people. I'd like to talk to you about your program. As we look at the increase from 2000 to 2010 in the Hispanic population in the United States, and as we look down the road at a 2012 election that will feature a new map, is there a practical, nonpartisan impact for Latinos to have this representative as opposed to that one?
Absolutely. In terms of how all of these trends and issues is affecting us, and from the USDA perspective, how it has the aggregate impact of the health and well-being of Latinos. I mean, immigration, we were just talking about immigration, SB 1070, it does have an impact, for instance, on the SNAP program. SNAP is the largest anti-hunger program in the country. It's helping more than 43 million people a month, which is pretty sobering. That means 1 out of every 7 individuals in the U.S. is getting this help. About 15% of those folks are Latinos. Nevertheless, although we're reaching somewhere between 5 and 7 million Hispanics through the program, we only have a participation rate of 56%. We actually just completed USDA in 2010, completed a very successful community roundtable tour where we visited selectively those states that had the highest volume of what we term food insecure Hispanic households. Those are the same states that are now, we'll see the changes of the impact of redistricting. California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, New York, Texas, and when you see the correlations, like earlier we were looking at the data patterns of redistricting, and I couldn't help but see the patterns of hunger and food insecurity and obesity. It's all connected. And so we completed these roundtable sessions. We had congressional members, elected officials, nuns, priests, teachers, union officials, you name it. And the whole point of it was to get together as a community, understanding, of course, there are geographic differences between communities. New York is not Texas. Texas is not California. But still, we have to work together. We have to collaborate. We've been doing that wholeheartedly with our friends on the Hill. But it takes everyone. And I think that in terms of where we are in our health and obesity and how we're going to take care of ourselves and our families, we really have to all pitch in and do it together, because USDA is doing its part. Government can't do this alone. But all of this is definitely having an impact for us.
Along with the results of the election changing the nature of the House of Representatives, and of course making for a much closer partisan representation in the U.S. Senate, a lot of state houses underwent a lot of change after November's vote. What does that do to the redistricting process, Brent?
Well, it certainly makes it challenging if the folks that are getting in are not looking at making sure that Latino representation is strong. State houses obviously control the redistricting process. They are the ones that come up with the plans. It's very difficult in many states that are important to us to be able to have input into that process if the delegations are not supportive of the community. So we, and that's when we come to MALDEF and say, we didn't do well with this process. And Latino districts, just an example, in Texas, there is an opportunity for 4 new seats, and that's almost entirely because of this growth of the Hispanic population. And yet there are those in Texas in leadership that are talking about not even including 2 of those seats for the Latino community, which you'd think, if anything, fairness would be 4. So, it's absolutely critical. I know that the last period that we went through with their districting process, unfortunately, on the front end, Latino organizations were not really given an opportunity to present our own maps, to present what we thought would be good plans, and so we did have to go to the courts and seek redress, and that may very well end up that way again, especially when you look at the way the state houses are right now, right at this moment. It's a troubling process. We're going to keep fighting, though, and I think the key thing is it's great what MALDEF has done with their redistricting academy that they had in San Antonio, and also another partner, Naleo, did one here in Washington. I think those are key efforts, because we need to provide not just the legal support behind this redistricting process, but the political will as well. And as a community, we need to keep pushing to make sure that this is done right. We've grown in population. We have a right to be represented. There should be one person, one vote. That principle needs to stand, and we have to defend that principle.
When I was covering a voting rights and redistricting federal case in Chicago that eventually resulted in the election of 4 Latino aldermen to the city council there, one alderman said to me, as we were in a break in the trial, why don't we just take a map, put a grid on it that roughly creates 50, 60,000 person districts, because Chicago had roughly 3 million people, and let that be the end of it. Why is there so much at stake with map making if there are more of this kind of person and that kind of person, more poor, less rich, more manual laborers and fewer white-collar workers? That will be reflected after you just place that 60,000 person grid, 50 seats, 60,000 person seats, and you're done. Why is this such a tortured process? Why is this such a tortured process? Tom?
It's a tortured process because redistricting is about political power. And political power is always difficult to discuss in polite company. It's always difficult to decide upon in back rooms. It's even more difficult to decide upon it out in public and in the open, which is what has to occur so that you get an understanding of what are the communities of interest, as Nina described. Those are the bedrocks. Those are the building blocks of the districts that need to be drawn. The Voting Rights Act exists to ensure that those building blocks are not put together in a way to ensure that communities are outvoted consistently. So the Voting Rights Act is a necessary protection against notions that may have superficial appeal, like let's cut it into X number of evenly shaped, evenly configured squares based on 60,000 or 650,000 or 750,000 per square. But if you actually did that, of course, you would have even more challenges because the political powers that be wouldn't like the way that came out. This has always been a process that is informed by
But Tom, let me jump in there. Should we then assume that if you did that, obviously the at-large districts in the little states would jiggle the math a little bit, and there are some states that have populations that are almost enough for another seat but not quite, so there's going to be some variation there. But if you roughly did that, press this grid down on a map of the United States, would the Congressional Black Caucus go down to 0 members? Would the Congressional Hispanic Caucus suddenly watch the room empty out because Democrats simply would not vote for Latino Democratic candidates in congressional seats? And similarly, would black voters be just so outnumbered everywhere that unless we engage in these black arts of the map maker's techniques, that we will not ever get representation because the hostility of the general population voter is just so intractable and so permanent a part of our politics that without this, there will be no minority representation in Congress?
Well, you never say no. Of course, there would still be African Americans and Latinos elected. But I do think you'd see a significant diminution in the numbers for both groups. And that's because we have the Voting Rights Act for a reason. There is a history in this country, a regrettable history, of certain folks seeking to suppress the participation and the voting of members of minority groups. And we see continuing efforts along those lines in some of what has been discussed earlier today. Make no mistake, but in the last 18 months, there have been a number of attempts specifically to decrease Latino political power and participation. You start with the amendment put forward by Senator Vitter and others to add a question to the census, entirely designed to decrease Latino participation in the census. You layer on top of that the cases that Nina described, first arguing for apportionment based on citizenship population rather than general population, and then arguing that the census itself is undermined because it failed to do exactly what the Vitter Amendment wanted it to do, which was to distinguish between citizens and non-citizens. There are ongoing efforts that indicate the continued need for a Voting Rights Act, and so long as there are efforts to suppress the voting participation, the electoral power of particular groups. That's why you have to have the Voting Rights Act. But I think it's also important to note, Ray, as you know, that this stuff started even when voters were entirely homogeneous. I mean, gerrymandering came out at a time when only white propertied men were allowed to vote. They were gerrymandering among themselves at that point in time. So this is a political process that has always involved horse trading, to mix many metaphors. You always get mixed metaphors when you talk about redistricting. But it's always involved that kind of political machinations. And the Voting Rights Act is simply about making sure that those machinations don't worsen ongoing patterns of attempted exclusions.
Is that the kind of stuff, is that sexy enough to get young Latinos to the polls? Redistricting? I'm sure that's your opening gambit. Hey, help us out, register, go vote, because, hey, we've got a redistricting coming down the line.
It's funny because we actually had, we were one of the census partners, and we worked very closely with MALDEF, and I'll never forget it, Steve Grove, the census director, said, so you want to make census sexy? We're like, we're going to try. and with the help of MALDEF, and we worked very closely with iTunes, the composer, people understood it, and it was actually one of our most successful campaigns. And fundamentally, when you start talking to young people and say, look, this is about you, your family, and your political voice, nothing is, as much as people keep talking about the 14th Amendment, SB 1070, all the stuff that's coming down the line, eliminating ethnic studies, nothing is galvanizing young people more than they are. And that's one of the reasons why you saw such a surge for the first time in the midterm elections that almost matched the equivalent of voting and participating in the 2010 midterms as 2008. That's a big deal. So it's a matter of how do you break up redistricting? How do you talk to them? It's funny because Nina and I talked a little bit before, and she's like, Texas got 4 seats. And now they want to say, okay, well, they 4 seats. Yes, we recognize it was because of the huge surge in the Latino population growth. But you know what? We don't want to give it to the Latino population, but we also don't want to give our 4 seats back, right? So they want it both ways. And I think it's a matter of how do you message to young Latinos and start talking to them about the importance of having that political representation. And fundamentally, they understand that. And they also want to see people that look like them representing them. And that's one of the big drivers behind redistricting is how do you actually get politicians that look like them, that represent their values and their interests. And again, it's trying to make it sexy. So hopefully in the 2012 election, we'll partner once again with LULAC and MALDEF, and we'll work our hearts out. No pressure, staff over there, okay?
I have to defend the sexiness of redistricting. you get shapely districts, salacious political talk behind closed doors.
Census tract data is where I squirm in my seat a little bit. Russell, what's the cross community interest with this? As a Latino who works for an organization involved in other civil rights campaigns.
Well, let me talk. I also think the census is very sexy, and
shows you how wrong a guy can be.
My organization actually did one of our most successful campaigns this last year, which we called Queer the Census, where we distributed over 200,000 pink stickers that LGBT and allied households put on their census form and mailed it in, because we too wanted to make the census sexy, to understand that because so much of the federal government's resources are directed based upon what the census says, that it is a very important tool. And right now, there is no federal survey that collects information on the LGBT community in a broad-based way.
Would you want a question? Isn't that a sort of double-edged sword that would make people as nervous as empowered?
Well, some people do say that, but it would also then not make us invisible, which is what is the case now across the U.S., where LGBT people are systematically invisible because there's no federal data collected on them. And data that is collected by research institutions, universities, and even an organization like my own is not held to the same standard or level that federal data collection is. So it could. We have this in our own organization of, do we put our name on the outside envelope of stuff that we send to our constituents? Because there is a long-standing fear of the closet. And are we going to be outing people to their postal carrier? Right.
That's a real
right?
concern.
It's a real fear, and so, but
especially in the absence of housing protection,
yes,
and other civil rights laws in a lot of jurisdictions.
That's right. And in over half or a majority of states in the United States, it is still legal to fire someone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And although organizations like mine and in concert with organizations like MALDEF have tried to work to secure these types of protections in municipalities and in states, it's still a gamble for folks to come out and to live their lives openly and honestly without fear of being fired simply because of who they are.
Lisa, to make this into a complete route on the sexiness of the census, I'm sure it's going to contain a lot of data that's useful not only to social scientists, journalists, and historians, but to your department. What does that document tell you about health, access to healthful food, and so on?
It'll help us better strategize on how to amplify access. I mean, that's something that we've been working very hard on and struggling with because we have data, but our data takes about a couple of years to comb through. And because, whatever we thought we knew before is so different because of the impact of the recession. I mean, our programs, our nutrition assistance programs were designed to act as a critical safety net. And the dependency and demand for these programs grew so quickly just in the last couple of years that whatever we thought we knew before, it's a different stage right now. So having access to that information can help us better understand not only how to make the programs better, because although these are federal programs, they are administered at the state and in the case of California on the county level. And so the trickle-down effect of, states barely balancing their budgets, demand for the service, increasing higher caseloads, it's become a real challenge to figure out how to give everybody the help they need at a time of crisis, because that's what the programs are supposed to do. But in a time, during a lean time, when we have to be really mindful about resources, where that time and attention and money goes is more critical than ever.
Whether it's peaches in South Carolina, cherries in western Michigan, apples in the Yakima Valley, lettuce in the central valleys of California, on and on and on. Mm-hmm. A lot of the food that gets to America's tables starts with a Latino playing a very central role in getting it there. And somehow, between that moment and the moment it hits the tables, something happens. I grew up at the other end in Brooklyn, where we didn't have very many farms, but we were very interested in eating 3 times a day. What happens between the land and the plate that creates that paradox of both being responsible, centrally responsible for feeding America and not eating properly?
Well, it's a fascinating dynamic because food is an ecosystem, and as you point out, Ray, it starts with our farm workers. Right. And USDA, I'm proud to say, I used to work in Arizona with farm workers. It's wonderful to see how committed this administration is to reaching out to them, because that's where it all begins. And also our small farmers. It's interesting and amazing that the fastest demographic within small farmers today are Latinos. Many of them former farm workers who now want to become farmers themselves. And so when you look at the entire trend and dynamic of how the food gets to the table, well, again, it's so interesting because, ironically, newly arrived immigrant families tend to eat much better than those Latinos that have already been here more than a generation or two. It's the same dynamic of how in Asia, Japan and China now are seeing increases in obesity because they have a more westernized diet. So it's really interesting that immigrant families actually spend more on food per capita than any other racial ethnic category, buy more fruits and vegetables, eat less processed foods, but then when you become customized to a different diet, that's when you start seeing the higher increase in obesity. So, because Latinos are a complex community, right, we have folks in the same household who were born in the U.S. or foreign born, when we get to the table, when it gets to dinner time, it's important to highlight that as a culture, like, we're already eating really well, but we have to go back to basics. Being able to spend that time at home eating with family and loved ones. Research shows, your kids will do better in school. Your kids are less likely to get into trouble. It's better time to bond as a family and be able to also, when you're shopping, to support your local farmers, your local businesses that have fresh foods available. It's all an ecosystem. We all play a part, but immigrants and Latinos are a forefront part of that ecosystem.
We have less than 10 minutes left in the conversation, and I want to spend some time doing a postmortem on the DREAM Act. Mm-hmm. If there are any Americans who someone who designs campaigns might find to be good raw material to work with, to create public sympathy for, the people who are targeted by the DREAM Act would seem to be tailor-made. And yet, it just could not be pulled off toward the end of last year in the post-election session. What happened? What happened to the DREAM Act, and was the best shot lost after the results came in the first week in November? Brent?
Well, I really think the problem mostly was due to timing. The DREAM Act could have passed in the first year of the presidency of Barack Obama. It could have passed even in the second year if it was in the first half of the second year. But the last half of the second year, I think by that time we finally got around to saying, yes, let's push for the DREAM Act and focus on that, and got the president's support to do so. The environment had changed dramatically, and we'd already had the Tea Party, and I know we're diminishing what the Tea Party's been doing, but we've had those confrontations that were taking place over the summer against the health care bill in the previous year, and the political support that the president had started to erode. So I think that it wasn't so much about the DREAM Act, unfortunately, what was taking place in the fall of this past year, but about whether one party was going to allow another party to have a success or not. And it's very hard to argue your case when people are telling you it's not that I disagree with the DREAM Act, it's that I don't want it to happen right now, or I disagree with the strategy, or I think that they haven't, they waited too long, or these types of things that weren't really related to the criteria in the bill. Because if there's something in the bill that needed to be changed, I think a number of us were willing to look at that. But that wasn't what the pushback we were getting. So I think the biggest problem that we ended up having was just timing. We waited too long to push forward on the DREAM Act, and I have to give a plug here to Tom, because he was, I think, one of the first of the leadership, even before LULAC, to say, look, we got to start thinking about this down payment strategy. Let's try to get the things that we can get. If the whole comprehensive package is too big to do right now, let's get DREAM through, let's get Ag Jobs through, let's get some administrative changes that can make a big difference for our communities now, and then keep coming back. And I think many of us realize that was the right strategy in hindsight. It's just that by the time we realized that, it was past the moment which we had. So I don't think going forward, though, that this means that we can't get it passed. I think actually it puts it in a stronger case. We heard a lot of people say, it's not the bill. We do think we've got to help young folks. We're not against this principle. People working hard, getting a good education, being ready to contribute to our economy. We don't want to not give them a chance. So I think we have a chance to come back and try again. But this time we've got to be better at assessing when the timing is right. And I'm hoping that when we do approach it, we do that. And I think there's certainly messaging is a key thing as well. We got beat on messaging again. We always seem to do that. Folks are trying to turn into some kind of helping more illegal immigrants come to the country using those kind of wording. And we've got to just remind folks, these are people who've been here a long time. They've gone to our high schools, they've graduated, they're ready to serve our country or go to college, and they're going to stay here and they're going to contribute to our economy. And the question is, are we going to let them do that legally or not? And I think that if we approach it in that perspective, we'll have much better success.
One of the reasons it was left to the last minute was the protracted debate over health care. Did the administration burn up too much political capital there so that there was none left for the DREAM Act when the time came?
Well, Ray, I think it's important for us to note that a majority of the House of Representatives supported the DREAM Act, voted in favor of the DREAM Act. A majority of the U.S. Senate voted in favor of the DREAM Act. A majority of the public indicated that it supported the DREAM Act. What happened was a minority of U.S. senators used the vehicle of the filibuster to block something that had majority support. And in doing that, they betrayed constitutional principles. They betrayed the education that this country provided to those students and ought to have the ability to take the fruits of that education. And they betrayed the hard work of the DREAM Act students. That's what happened. A small minority, a minority of senators used a procedure that is not in the Constitution to betray constitutional principle. And I think they ought to be held accountable for that. I think what Brent said, there's much to it about the political strategy that went on. But we were playing that strategic game because there were senators sitting in office who were willing to betray their oath to support the Constitution by abusing the filibuster to block something that had majority support of the country and of both houses of Congress.
Final comments from Russell, Lisa, and Maria?
Well, I would just say that the failure of to pass the DREAM Act was a very, very sad day. On the same day, Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal was moved to a vote and eventually passed. But our community, both the Latino community and the LGBT community, should have been as equally concerned that each should have passed, and that the failure of the House to pass or the Congress to pass the DREAM Act is a terrible tragedy. And I am hopeful, as Tom said earlier, that it's going to come back up, and that as a community, both LGBTs and Latinos and LGBT Latinos can push to finally pass the DREAM Act, because it will affect a lot of folks. And the Trail of Dreams campaign of the young people that walked 1,500 miles to raise awareness around the DREAM Act, their leadership were gay. Two of them were gay men, and so this is an issue that should be of concern to all Americans, but in particular to Latinos and to LGBT people.
In closing, I would just say, there are a lot of good things on the horizon that are happening in the administration that will help Latino children and families on the issue of hunger, nutrition, and obesity. The Let's Move campaign just celebrated its first anniversary, which is really exciting last week, and includes public service announcements in English and Spanish. And we have, of course, the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which thankfully was signed last December by the president, that will involve sweeping changes to school meals. And you think about the millions of Latino children that depend upon those meals and need that nourishment to do well in school. It's fantastic. And at USDA, we've been working really hard in many facets. Aside from the community roundtables, we're doing things like revamping our citizenship guidance. SNAP, or food stamps, is the only program that actually has citizenship requirements. And we've been working really hard with USCIS, also Department of Justice, on getting the guidance right and building new materials around it. We've been working with our civil rights teams to make sure that limited English proficiency, all materials are available to both languages, English and Spanish, but not just in terms of translating things, but that they have the cultural competence and accessibility that communities need. So a lot of good things happening, and just please spread the word that this is an issue of focus.
And quickly, Maria.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think this has been a great opportunity to see where we are today, to take that test, but then also say, where are we going to be for 2012? Redistricting is down the line, but I'm also very hopeful. We have over 2 million young people that are going to be eligible voters by 2012. That doesn't include potential new citizens, based on a lot of the great work that Naleo is doing as well to make sure and to ensure through the YSODA campaign. So there's a lot of hopefulness there. But fundamentally, I think it's a matter of, again, let's break it. Let's talk about not just this as Latino issues, but American issues, and let's get our friends and loved ones involved.
Thanks to all our panelists this afternoon for their terrific contributions. It's clear from our discussion today that there's still a lot of work to be done. We hope that at the least we'll leave this forum with some areas of consensus and help one another in service of a collective goal to improve life for Latinos in this country. I heard a lot of optimism expressed, but it was grounded in realism about the things, the problems that await us down the road. We have a good dialogue on Facebook and Twitter. coming from across America, please join us and leave your comments for MALDEF. If you'd like to see more quality and substantive events like the Latino State of the Union, we encourage your continued charitable support. On behalf of MALDEF, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you next year at the 5th Annual Latino State of the Union, and the State of the Union is going to be better next year, right? For the 5th one. Thanks a lot.
I'm going to take this.
Church